Hey, getting ready for 4th of July weekend. Hopefully, it's Friday the 3rd. I just want to let each of you know I just saw this video of a gentleman pulled over on the side of the freeway, and a police officer's rolling up on him, and the passenger window's down. The police officer shoves a flashlight in the window and asks the young man what he's doing parked on the side of the road here in the middle of the night. And the gentleman happened to be on the phone with the VA suicide hotline, and he's crying, and he's an Army veteran. And the police officer shows him that level of empathy and sympathy that you hope, and I hope that he would. And in the end, the young man gets out of the vehicle, and the cop and him hug, and the police officer gets him help, gets him an ambulance, and sends him to the VA hospital. I was thinking back on this. There I was on 205, a big freeway in Portland, Oregon. I was in my brand new 1988 Ford pickup truck, or Toyota pickup truck, right when they first came out with those new Toyota SR5s. And I was coming up the off-ramp off of Johnson Creek Boulevard. I would have been 27 years old at the time, born in 1961, and I had everything going for me. I had money, I had a great vehicle, I had my own home. I'd made a ton of money, actually. But what was interesting was there was this ongoing, everyday solitude, internal fight going on all the time. In fact, years later, probably about 20 years ago, I would have been in my 40s at the time, I actually wrote a note one morning that what I'd been doing all the way back to the mid-'80s was I had actually been committing suicide, a form of suicide from my perspective. And from that standpoint, what I mean is I wasn't killing the biology, I wasn't killing the body, the biology. I was killing my biography. I was working on my biography, retroactive. I was constantly digging in and going after those things that had traumatized me growing up, to include actual physical rape trauma in the 3rd and 4th grade by my older brother, to include the yelling and the screaming and the hitting in our home, and the drinking and the drugs, and just the constant inconsistencies that a young man or a young lady would live during that time. The hatred and the vitriol and just slamming of doors and squealing of tires and braking and people getting out of the car and throwing things and glass breaking. It was constant. I was always involved in a world in my immediate family and my surrounding family, extended family, where we had nothing but inconsistencies. And one of the most inconsistent things we had was a lack of money. It's no wonder that I'm attracted to these industries like the mortgage industry, the stock brokerage industry, and this industry, the merchant cash advance industry, where I'm helping people with money. And what's interesting is I had just gotten off the phone here about 2 hours ago with a guy who was at wit's end, financially speaking, as a business owner. As him and I got talking, they've been in business 19 years. He's doing $1.8 million a month. And as I'm looking at his bank statements, I'm like, Randy, listen to me. You're doing an average of $1.8 million a month, but brother, you're spending money like you're making, $2.3 million a month. You're constantly $300,000 to $500,000 behind, and all you're surviving on is cash flow. If at any minute that spigot shut off and that cash flow stopped, you'd be out of business. This is musical chairs. And if you're not careful and you're at the birthday party of a group of 9-year-olds and you're one of those 9-year-olds and that music stops, if there's no chair left, brother, you're out of business. And he's like, I never thought of it that way. And I go, man, dude, I got to know more about what it is you're doing with this money. And he tells me, he's like, I spent till 3 a.m. this morning getting my trailer ready, welding, in his shop that he had built for $390,000 on payments, so that he could load his quads on there and load his dune buggy on there. And they were going out of town for 4th of July, and they're going to make it the entire week next week also for 4th of July weekend. And I asked him, I said, what do you think you'll spend on this trip? He goes, oh my God, Brett. He goes, I've thought about it again and again and again. It's bugging me beyond words. He says, I know I'm going to spend $10,000 to $15,000. Because at the same time, my sons and I and their friends are going to be in the quads and in the dune buggy. My wife's going to be in town with our 2 daughters. And she's going to be shopping with the other ladies. They live in Utah, southern Utah. I said, man, you're 48 years old. You're going to destroy the one thing that keeps creating all these opportunities for you financially speaking, and that is your business. Because your flesh is out of control. You know, he made the comment to me at that point. He's like, you know, this is the second conversation I've had with you in 2 days, Brett. And you're talking to me like no one's ever talked to me before, not even my parents. I said, you know, brother, I spent 64 years learning how to speak from this dose of reality. And more often than not, what I find is most people's unwillingness to make these changes, even though they have great things going on in their lives, they seem to be strangling that aspect of their life that is working for them. So please understand me as you roll into the weekend, especially this 4th of July weekend, that there are business owners out there that are in trouble. And if you're in trouble, I can tell you what, you know what it feels like. You know? Don't underestimate the need for money out there. You've got over 100 million businesses in this country. And so many of you act like there's nothing available for you to talk to out there. You got 100 million business owners plus in this country, of which I can guarantee you 50 to 75% of them are in trouble financially speaking. And if not you, they're going to end up doing business with someone else. This has never changed for me. I've always seen people do a poor job of running their lives financially speaking. Ever since I was a little boy in our own family, my dad made a boatload of money each month, each year, as a realtor for years. But the one thing that he did not do was he did not save any money. He would get it and he would give it away. He would get it and he'd give it away. He'd get it and he'd spend it. And that's the way these business owners work. That's the way they work. That's the way they live. You know, and it's hard for you to comprehend that until you've done your 10th, 15th, 20th, 30th loan. And pretty soon you start to see this common denominator. But what we really need to look at more than anything is that what goes on in this country, these consumers out there, there's so many of us that are consumers, is that we're trying to fill these voids. We're consuming alcohol, we're consuming marijuana, we're consuming cocaine, we're consuming methamphetamines, we're consuming porn, we're consuming, groceries, gotta have another freezer full of food, another refrigerator full of food, have one out in the garage, gotta have more clothing, gotta have more underwear, gotta have more pants, gotta have more shoes, gotta have more socks, gotta have, a different vehicle, gotta have another vehicle, gotta have a motorcycle, gotta have a motor scooter, gotta have a quad, gotta have a dune buggy, gotta have a bicycle, gotta go do my yoga, gotta go do my meditation, gotta do my acupuncture, gotta eat my organic, it's constant. Every time we turn around, it's just constant spend. And oftentimes when we're not spending, we're wondering what we're trying to figure out we're trying to figure out what we're going to be buying next. Sorry for any incapabilities of being able to speak clearly, but anyway, these business owners, so many of them, their flesh is out of control. And what I really want to emphasize is there are so few people that I've met in my lifetime that are willing metaphorically to take, if this were a knife, take a knife and, cut their biographical throat and say, I quit. I'm not going to tolerate this anymore. I'm not going to carry on like this anymore. For me, that's the way it was. I was just like this young man I talk about at the beginning of this video, but I didn't commit suicide in regards to sticking a gun in my mouth or ODing on pills or cutting my throat or anything, cutting my wrist or anything like that. But what I did was I was constantly working on these principles that defined my character, so that one day I could stand upright like a home on top of a foundation of concrete, and be able to be part of my own flesh like I feel like today. Well, I'm in the middle of this video, 12 minutes and 55 seconds in, and have my wits about me. Not be in a situation where the turmoil going on inside my brain, or the turmoil going on in my upper shoulders and neck areas where I used to carry all my stress in my teens, mid to late 20s, early 30s, before I really started to feel good. That the stress in your heart, the stress in your stomach. I meet so many people who have these stresses in their lives, but what's interesting is there's an unwillingness so often to realize that, we are the problem. I am the problem. I am the solution to my problem, and therein lies the problem. You are the problem. You are the solution to your problem, and therein lies the problem. Yeah, I get it all the time when people reach out to me after something like this and they say, well, Brett, you need to let go and let God, or let go and let Jesus. Hey, listen, make no mistake about it. From my perspective, I don't think for one moment that God, or Jesus for that matter, is going to help those that are not helping themselves. You can't just sit there. You can't just lay there and improve upon the quality of your life. Unless, of course, you need some rest after you've done some work. But for me personally, one of the things that I could tell you is I always roll into these types of weekends and say to myself, thank God I have some money. Thank God I have some money. I can't begin to tell you how many times as people I meet over the years that roll into these weekends and they don't have a dollar to their name. And This has been going on since I was in my teens and earlier with my own family and with my friends. Again and again and again. And if you find yourself without money, what you have to understand is you got to get to the point where you're saying to yourself, I'm not going to tolerate this anymore. I'm not going to put up with it anymore. At some point you have to say to yourself, you know what? The discomfort of a lack of quan, of a lack of cash, of a lack of money on hand is actually worse than the discomfort of picking up a cell phone and calling a business owner and saying, hey man, this is Brett. I'm with a company called Mom and Pop Business Funding. Do you need any working capital? Who cares if he or she or they say no? Click, call another. Click, call another. Who cares? And who cares if for whatever reason you make a word salad out of this? Who cares? I mean, I could tell you this again and again and again. I'd be out there on Columbia Boulevard, and it reminded me of that movie 8 Mile with Eminem. There he is on the stage talking about mom's spaghetti, vomiting. And I'd be out there in my sales calls, and I'd be throwing up. I'd be dry heaving in the parking lot, get anxiety and get the shakes. But somehow I went in again and again and again. Somehow I made these calls and set up these appointments, and I went in again and again and again with Smith Barney. I cannot begin to tell you how it hit me. It wasn't that way for me when I was 8 and 9 and 10 and 11 and 12 years old. I had this confidence, but that confidence went away. And what showed up at the end of the day, right after I graduated from high school, was this insecurity that lied within me dormant. And all of a sudden it was there. And there was an angst. And there was a question as to whether or not I was going to be okay, and as to whether or not what I was doing was the right thing to be doing. And again and again and again, I had to see a psychiatrist, and I had to see my church minister at Milwaukee Lutheran Church, and I had to work on me over and over again, book after book after book after book after book. But one day I started to realize that all this work that I'd done with these books, with these professionals, and in addition in the gym constantly, and out jogging constantly to keep those endorphins and the dopamine coming, and to keep myself, from going. I was just in a war in my head at all times. There was a war. I forgot about that war. Again and again, I forget about it until I see things like this. See with this video today. Here's this young 20-something-year-old kid parked on the side of the road. Look, I hate it when people say to you and I, life's tough, life's a bitch, and then you die, this type of crap. Man, I don't look at it that way. I just don't. But I do know that if you're not doing your work, if you're not working on your physical body, if you're not working on your mental body, then there's a real high likelihood, you're going to be without. And so often when we're without, it's hard for us to give to others. So I hope you have a great 4th of July. I highly recommend that if you're not where you want to be right now, financially speaking, you just get an ink pen, you get a pad of paper, okay? And you just start writing down in there today's date and the things that you want to do on here. I don't number my things I want to do on this list. I've got letters A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and so on. That way I don't look at the list and say, oh, I've got 28 things to do today. I like to leave letters there. I've got things to do for myself personally in one area. I got things to do for the business in another. I've got things to do in regards to my eating, how I'm going to eat. I've got my religion on, got my portion for religion on here. My testament, my relationship, my devotion with God. I've got the writing I do daily for an hour on here. I've got my notes on my podcast. I've got my notes on training that I'm going to be involved in today and what I'm going to be going over. And then I've got a spot here also for bills. You know, look, if you don't program yourself, who's going to program you? You've got to learn to program yourself. For me, when we were kids, we played a game called Simon Says in the front yard. Years later, I was in my late teens, 18, 19, right in there, 17. It was 18 or 19. And I developed Brett Says. And I started making myself do things. But what I found on my list of things to do was, one, I had numbered them. And I didn't like how many numbers there were on there. So I eventually started using letters instead. And two, no matter what, it seemed like there was stuff that was camouflaged on the list that I never got to. And one day I fell upon this epiphany while working on my list. It's like, these are not things that you can get done today. These are things you could get done next week or next year. So I started to put together my What's Important Now acronym, WIN, What's Important Now abbreviation acronym, What's Important Now, the stuff I do today, the stuff I can do later, and then the stuff I'm going to do a long time from now. So I started to work on my short-term goals, my medium-term goals, and my long-term goals. So I'm set up that way here with my list, so that when I go into working on a long-term goal, as an example like writing, I know I'm only going to spend 1 hour a day on that. Because no matter what, I'm never going to get where I want to get in one day. I'm only going to get 1 day's worth. This is something I'm doing long-term. Writing screenplays, writing books. It's not something I'm doing today, but it's something I chunk away at today, like they tell you and I, how do you eat an elephant? 1 bite at a time. So I take a bite a day. And someday the elephant will go away. It's like a mantra. Take a bite a day. Someday the elephant will go away. So watch yourself as you're working on your goals, getting ready for next week. Think about it throughout the weekend. Don't just party down so much that you just leave next week as a mystery. You can't run through life. You shouldn't anyway. Run through life waking up on Monday to the mystery of the week. Now, I like to take my Thursdays, yesterday, and plan my next week. Based off what's transpired this week, I put together my next week. And you might start thinking about that, but I can tell you that one of the reasons why this young man was pulled over on the side of the road, and one of the reasons why the suicide rate is so high among these young men and young ladies who leave the armed services, is they don't have those systems anymore. The study has been done and found that less than 1/100th of 1% of the people in the armed services kill themselves. It's not until they get out of the armed services that they start to kill themselves. Not while they're in the armed services. And I can tell you that one of the number one reasons why they kill themselves is they have nothing to do. They don't have a clock that wakes them up in the morning. They're not being told what to do all day, shown what to do all day, expected to do these things today. And so often I meet people who are business owners who live their lives that way. They busted their ass because they wanted to be a business owner. They got their business to a certain point, and now what are they doing? They've lost those principles that got them there. And now they're out of control. And they're doing drugs, they're doing alcohol, they're living on porn, and they're shopping all the time. They're not working as hard. They're acting like they've made it. I like that metaphor where when you get to the top of a mountain, you realize that it was blocking the mountain behind it, and it's actually taller. So no matter what, you're always going up another mountain. You're always hiking towards the top, never reaching the top. So anyway, I hope you have a wonderful 4th of July. If you're hurting financially, understand it has nothing to do with your ex-wife or your ex-husband or your ex-partner or your family or your friends or your current husband or wife or partner. It has to do with you and what you've been up to. And if you don't want to be part of this anymore, if you're at that point where you're saying to yourself, I don't want to tolerate this anymore, then put some expectations down for yourself. Force yourself into doing it. Endure the pain. Endure the humiliation. Endure the doors being slammed in your face. Endure, someone telling you no. And eventually what will happen is endurance will show up. I've gotten to the point, honestly, look, I'm an old man. I'm nothing to look at. Hell, I never was anything to look at, quite frankly. So my looks were never going to be what was going to make me money. And I didn't know how to speak like I know how to speak now. Not that I'm all that great at it, but this stuff was developed over 20 and 30-year period, 40-year period, 45-year period, 50-year period, 55-year period. So you toe the line and you go again. And then one day you wake up and you realize that there's a resistance here. That I don't pay attention to the hogwash, the bullshit, the crap that, leads you down that path of ill repute. It really is like a Robert Frost poem where you choose the road less traveled, and that makes all the difference. I've always been that guy. I've always been attracted to men and women, people like that. And I pray that you find yourself in that position where you're being rejected. You're being rejected. Because at some point in time, what happens is pretty soon you start to feel that endurance that comes along with rejection. Where it's like, okay, 3 yeses, 1 no, 5 no's, 1 yes. And then pretty soon you just don't keep track of it. So I wish you nothing but the best, the happiest of 4th of July weekends. If you're in trouble, financially speaking, reach out to a friend or a family member. Get with somebody, get with a friend or a family member. If you're in trouble emotionally, get with a friend or a family member, get to a hospital, seek some help. Don't be afraid to ask for help. It's a sign of strength, not a sign of weakness. And don't forget that there are millions and millions and millions of businesses throughout this country that need your help. They're waiting on you after this weekend is over. So have a wonderful weekend. Enjoy the hell out of yourself. Use your head. I hate it when my mom always says to me, be safe, be careful. Like, fuck, screw that. Live your life. Go let your freak flag fly and let the cards fall where they may. But then understand, you come back to work on Monday, you should have a plan in place for yourself on where you're going to go, what you're going to say, how you're going to do it. Maybe you're doing it from home. Maybe you're doing it on foot. Maybe you're doing it from public transportation. Maybe you've got your own transportation. But start getting that list ready so that you have these things for yourself to do. So you don't appear like someone who's discharged out of the armed services and then there's just nothing. Right? It's completely representative, by the way, of the United States from the standpoint we graduate from high school and then there's just nothing. If you don't go to college, there's just nothing. Until what? Until you have 2.5 kids, a dog, a wife, or a partner, and your own house, which is 10 years later, 15 years later. You're really no value to society until then. The way our society has looked at it for years and years. Sorry about that. I got a terrible ear itch. Thank God for these reading glasses. It's funny. My wife made the comment today. She goes, look at your reading glasses, for God's sakes. They don't even stay on. You need new reading glasses. Look at them. They're all bent up. And she's like, what is it with you? I'm like, for God's sakes, what the hell do I care? I paid $26 for these things. I can't find a pair of reading glasses that's worth a shit, quite frankly, regardless of what cost I pay. I go through reading glasses like I do ink pens. Who cares? It's part of the reason why I work. I guess I thank God I've got the money to be able to pay for reading glasses. It always comes back to money with me. It always does. And I've come to realize now more than ever that, man, even talking to my own kids, we're talking about how much it's going to cost to go through the 4th of July weekend. Oldest son with his wife, with his family, and youngest son with his gal. These kids are going to drop $1,000 like it's nothing. Think about that. $1,000 in a weekend. There's 52 weekends in a year. You drop $1,000 a weekend, that's $52,000 a year. It is so expensive to be alive right now. It is unbelievable. Yet interestingly enough, we don't seem to add value to society unless we're living alone, have our own job, our own house, our own this, our own that. And it's like, man, this has only been going on for a short period in human history. It wasn't very long ago, 40 years, 50 years, 60 years ago, where we lived together as families for a hell of a lot longer than we do now. So if you find yourself in a situation where you're in over your head financially speaking, for God's sakes, seek help. Stop the insanity. Stop living that way. And you're in charge of this. Be the master of your soul. Be the master of your fate. Don't wake up and just be a maple leaf in the wind and end up wherever that day on the asphalt road or on the concrete road. What if it's raining? The maple leaf just gets pinned against the ground or up against a curb. What if the wind is blowing? The maple leaf's just blowing on down the road. Put together a plan for yourself. Set a goal. Make a plan. Ask yourself a question. Do you believe in the plan? Put the plan in action and do not deviate from the plan. And when you deviate, put the plan back in action. And when you're done, the cherry on top, hold a dance and thank yourself for what you've done. So this weekend should be a weekend where you thank yourself for having worked hard this week. I know it's going to be that weekend for me where I worked my ass off this week, and therefore I deserve the weekend. Why would I think that I deserve my dessert before I eat my main course? You've got to do some chores before you go outside to play. There's no reason in hell why you can't take charge of yourself. There's nothing wrong with that. Don't look for others to do it for you, especially professionals like the police, for God's sakes. Anyway, I hope you have a wonderful weekend with you and your family, and I hope to see you come Monday for the Monday morning meeting. We're going to have a great Monday morning meeting. We're going to talk about a loan that is funded and have the gentleman on and have him featured. Looking forward to having him and his national sales manager on the call. Love and kindness in your direction, and have a tremendous 4th of July. I'll see you out there on the battlefield of life. Give them hell. Give them hell. And don't give in. Love and kindness in your direction. Bye-bye, all of you. Thanks for joining me. Bye-bye.